If you have old bows in your club, you might recognize this sign of wear and tear. On the inside of the bow, the belly as we say, you'll see these iconic holes. These are caused by none other than the arrow. How? When archers nock the arrow, they often have a tendency to jab the point of the arrow into the belly. This problem is so well known that even dating back to 1859, the text Archery, its theory and practice by Horace A. Ford, describes the appearance of the bows as being like smallpox or measles, identifying the same tendency to poke the bow as they nock the arrow.
Now, it's one thing to see club bows damaged. They're fairly inexpensive, we expect wear and tear, so that to us is kind of normal. But if it's your own bow and it's brand new, I'm sure you wouldn't be very happy if you started poking holes into the belly. So how do you avoid doing that? Now, from the club bow side, the poking happens almost universally for one reason. It's because the learners, and again, they are learners, they're not used to handling bows and arrows, that's why it's fair. But often people get fixated on where they hold things. So they're told to hold the bow here, and they hold the arrow here. And again, in our minds, we can manipulate these things freely, but in the mind of a learner, they have to hold this. So when they nock the arrow, they'll try to put the arrow on the string, holding it like this. Now, in theory, that should be fine. But remember, this is a very, very long shaft. So the arrow shaft is long, thin, and light, but the arrow point is heavy. So you think you're holding basically a stick, but you're not. You're holding a weighted stick. So it's hard to manipulate the arrow when it's long and when you're holding it by one end. It's just hard to balance. So it leads to a somewhat clumsy nocking action where you pick the arrow from your ground quiver, you hold it by the nock, and then you try and insert it carefully into the bow. And because you don't control the point of the arrow, it might go around, it might go the wrong side, or in the worst case, it might jab into the bow itself. And the same thing if you're using a back quiver as well. Some people, especially new guys, will use back quivers because it comes with the bow or it's really cool. So you get used to holding by the nock, you whip it out, and then you insert it in the same way. And that's, again, still kind of risky because, again, many people will get it first shot. You can still insert the arrow through the bow, slide it in and nock, or you could go around the other side and then nock, but in many cases it's gonna be a miss. It's just not reliable enough, and of course any damage here, it's kind of like permanent, so you don't really want to risk jabbing your bow. So how do we address this? This is both as the new archer and especially if you're a club instructor and you're tired of seeing people scuff your bows. Number one is you don't have to tell people to hold the arrow by the nock. It just comes to second nature where we say pick the arrow from, say, the ground quiver or from the cone, and then you put it on the bow. We kind of skip steps because it's assumed people have eyes and hands and they can put the arrow on the thing. But again, remember, people are very anxious when learning archery, so they're very nervous here and they're very nervous here. So they say they'll pick it up and they'll do the whole jabby thing because they can't align things. It's just hard to do so. It's not natural. So the basic way to solve this is to not hold the arrow by the nock, and in fact hold it lower down. Now the principle is the closer it is to the tip of the arrow, or the closer you hold it to the tip of the arrow, the easier it is to control. The weight is all here. So if you hold it here, you can move it. If you hold it over here, it's much harder to control with precision. So the solution is simply tell people to hold it further down the shaft. Now, if you hold it from the ground quiver, you might say hold it, say, at the base of the fletching. Don't hold the fletching, so it can damage it. Not very good for that. But hold it towards the middle and then carefully put it into the bow. Or if you're using a hip quiver or a field quiver especially, hold it by the shaft or close to the end, pull it up and then manipulate it onto the bow. If you're using a back quiver, same kind of principle. Instead of holding by the tip, just grab it by the shaft down here, pull it out, and then slide it onto the bow. So for me, when I'm shooting this particular longbow, to avoid scratching the inside, instead of grabbing my arrows from the knock, and I can whip it across and stash here, but I don't want to lose control. What I do instead is I hold it just below the fletchings, grab it here, slide it along the inside of the limb, and then push it on. It just eases the big motion here and slide it on there, rather than trying to jab it through. So we're not trying to thread needles here, but going careful, and then thread through. I'd rather do it that way. So from the back quiver, I'll do it that way. And don't forget, you can use the bow hand as well. You can pin the arrow with your finger against the bow to control it easier. So if I'm using the closer point grip here, I can slide it through the bow, place it there. I can place it, not like thread it, but just place it there, pin it, and then push it through. And then when I'm knocked, I can let down and I can shoot. Now you can of course go around the string, so I personally like going through the bow, a little riskier, but as long as you control the tip, then you can slide it through. But you can go around the strings, go over, pin it, slide it forward, like that. Now you can of course hold the knock and do it that way, but again, I just don't like the risk of putting this point and jabbing towards the bow. You're not really controlling it. But if you are doing this way, you can slide it, hold it, and then guide it through. So again, you can use this finger as the guide. It just makes it a little bit more controllable and therefore less likely to jab your bow here. Finally, as a point of etiquette, you should not be loading the bow sideways. This happens because, some people will put the arrow on the bow first, then put it on the string. Some people will instinctively put the arrow on the string first, and then put it on the bow. The problem, and you can see no doubt with my very long longbow, that the moment I turn it sideways, if I'm shooting next to people, I'm going to hit people beside me, both this guy and this guy. And that is of course not permitted and pretty bad manners because you are knocking people and causing a safety hazard. And again, this tends to happen because people are watching where the string is, putting the arrow on the string, and then putting the arrow on the bow in that order. Don't do it that way. Just go around it by putting the arrow on the bow first, then put it on the string. It doesn't matter if you go through the bow or around the bow. As long as you put the arrow there first, then guide it, that means you can keep the bow on a mostly vertical plane. So as you can see here, I'm holding my bow mostly vertical. I can put the arrow on the bow first, then guide it through on the string. If I go string first, I'm going to have to turn it sideways, string first, then bow. That feels quite natural because I'm watching what I'm doing, but I'm subconsciously turning it this way because that's how I see the string. So in short, look at where you want to put the arrow, put it there carefully, pin it with your finger, slide it through, and you're fine. This shouldn't need a timid tutorial, but because I see so many people do this, just instinctively jabbing the bow and how many holes we have, it's probably worth mentioning. So when you go to the range, you're like, how do I do this? It's just one less thing to stress about. Anyway, nothing serious here. You've probably seen this before, but if you're an instructor, you've probably noticed people jabbing it. If you do see that, that might be how you tell people to knock safely. Just think, bow first, string second, put the arrow on the bow, then put it on the string, and of course watch out for that bow tilt. Anyway, very short video. Hope that was interesting and helpful. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next time.